On behalf of the World Forum for Ethics in Business, we welcome you to the biggest global summit of the year on changing paradigms in a pandemic world. The World Forum for Ethics in Business is a public interest foundation registered in Belgium. The mandate of the forum includes establishing indispensable ethical foundations of business in a globalized world. In this session, strengthening mental health at the core of peace building, development, and humanitarian work, the International Association for Human Values is delighted to partner with WFEB. I'm Ghahremani Prabhakar. I head Sustainable Development for the Art of Living. I've been actively involved with the Art of Living and the International Association for Human Values in various regional and global roles for the last 23 years, and have been working in the grassroots in projects rooted in all 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. It's such a privilege for me to be moderating this panel of passionate developmental experts who've been working years and years to mainstream mental health in peace building, humanitarian response, and development globally. Representing UN bodies, governments, and other national and global institutions, these people realize that taking care of the hearts and minds of people impacted by conflict, disasters, climate change, and poverty is as important as influencing policy and creating infrastructure. What do they do? What makes them tick? Why do they do what they do? How can we work together to put individuals and their families back in the heart of the peace and developmental process? Without wasting any time, let's hear this directly from these pioneers and front runners and how the world will think differently in the future about its people and their suffering. To our audience out there, during the course of the session, do feel free to tweet, like, and ask your questions on our channels. Hashtag Changing Times, Let's Talk Health, World Health Day. This session will also remain available online, so you can share this later with your friends who couldn't make it today. To our speakers, this is a 90-minute session. And to start with, you each have 5 minutes each to make your initial presentation. We would want to encapsulate the entire wisdom of your experience in this little time capsule. So I will be timekeeping, and I will ring this little bell just when you have 1 minute left. In our first panel, we have Darshak Hathi, International President for the International Association for Human Values. We have Dr. Raffi Gregorian, Director and Deputy to the Under Secretary General, the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism. We have Phyllis Odabas Galdai, Executive Director of IAHV USA. And we have Dr. Dara Ghahremani, a research professor and neuroscientist in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at UCLA. So I'm going to introduce Darshak first. Darshak is the International President for the International Association for Human Values. The organization was founded in 1997, leading in sustainable development, peace and conflict resolution, and facilitating humanitarian dialogue. Under his leadership, the organization has led large and immediate global response to the pandemic in 2020. Darshak is a leading expert in mental health, mediation and conflict resolution, and has been a part of several historic peace delegations, including in Colombia, Nepal, and Venezuela. Darshak, over to you to talk about IAHV and the pillars of your work and your strategic priorities in a post-pandemic world.
Namaste. Thank you, Ghahremani. On behalf of the International Association for Human Values, I would also like to welcome and thank speakers and delegates to this event. In the words of our founder, Sri Ravi Shankar, this pandemic has been like the Third World War, what we all are experiencing. So in war, we tend to focus on physical well-being, economic resilience, and rehabilitation. So our approach is also to address these issues, and we are aligned with the SDGs. In addition to that, one thing we prioritize is to take care of mental health and trauma relief. Because social regeneration begins at the level of individuals. So our theory of change is ABC: awareness, sense of belongingness, and commitment. Let me explain. When the individual becomes stress-free with the help of life skills, mindfulness, yoga, meditation techniques, etc., then he or she feels awareness, a sense of responsibility, and a sense of belonging with the community. And from that oneness, a larger vision dawns to take care of the planet and to bring a peace to others as well. So in 2020, for example, globally, we reached about 250,000 people online with a stress and anxiety relief program, which was much needed at that time, that all we have experienced. So we reach out to the frontline workers, doctors and nurses, police forces, prison inmates, and the general public. In fact, I personally have counseled many people who called our helpline and prevented them from committing suicide. You know, doctors were stressed. The workload was one thing. Of course, they were all heavily loaded, but not knowing how to deal with this virus, whether the pandemic was man-made or not, it created a lot of uncertainty and a stress for these people who were helping others. That's why our first strategic pillar is to ensure mental health techniques and solutions. And they are scaled up and made available to those who need it most. Our second pillar is a peace building at various levels. I would say inner peace is the key to the world peace. In fact, I was reading the definition by the UNESCO that the peace is not just the absence of war. They said that the peace begins in the minds of men and women, and that peace must be established on the basis of humanity's morals. It's so interesting because this is what exactly the IHV does in all our work, like conflict prevention, resolution, and mediation, also humanitarian dialogues. One of the most interesting experience was when I personally accompanied Sri to Colombia, where we met the FARC leaders and talked about nonviolence and helped them in mental well-being techniques, which resulted in unilateral ceasefire. And it was the first time in the history of last 50 years. It was also acknowledged by the President Santos. He said that this was the turning point in the peace process. Another example is Kashmir, where we do de-radicalization and capacity building of youth through psychosocial intervention. We have also conducted many reconciliation programs between the extremist group and the victims of the terrorists in these areas, which has also resulted in improved lives and livelihood. And the third and the last point I want to make is important of mental health in sustainable development and humanitarian assistance. For the last 4 decades, we have developed a volunteer force whose mental strength, resilience, and commitment helped us respond quickly when the pandemic struck. For example, when the lockdown was there, when the supply chain was immediately disrupted, and we used our farmers network, our youth volunteers on the ground, and to reach out to almost 2.5 million families with over 75 million meals in India alone. And we did the same thing in Philippines and Malaysia and Germany and many other countries. And to large extent, this prevented the exodus of migrants and interstate travel during the pandemic, at least in India, to begin with. So in my mind, I have this question. Isn't the goal of sustainable development a happy society? What do you think? For me, the changing paradigm is that peace, prosperity, and happiness go together. And root of this is mental health. This should be our legacy for current and the future generation. Let me conclude with the words of Sri. This pandemic is an opportunity for human values to take front seat in our pursuit of growth and the prosperity. So with these few words, I would like to conclude my speech. Thank you once again, all of you, for being here with me.
Darshak, thank you so much. You know, I've known you for over 20 years, and I've seen you carry that peace within you consistently through all communication, all interaction, and you really live what you talk about. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
From Darshak, from Darshak, we go to Dr. Raffi Gregorian as Director and Deputy to the Under Secretary General, United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, bringing to the United Nations over 33 years of academic, diplomatic, and military experience in counterterrorism and international peace and security. Interestingly, in an earlier role, Dr. Gregorian initiated the first new US peacekeeping policy in 25 years and led a number of important peacekeeping reforms and helped secure full funding for the UN peacekeeping budget, which is absolutely laudable. Dr. Gregorian, you have been working on preventing and countering terrorism, which is a main factor for undermining sustainable peace and development. How has the pandemic affected the lives of those impacted by terrorism today? And how do you integrate psychosocial support in your work for victims of terrorism, for the fighters, their families, and others?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to participate in this interesting panel discussion on mental health and psychosocial support in peace building and development. I know that some of you are asking yourselves, what has the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism got to do with today's panel? Well, a lot, actually. Let me first talk about the current terrorist landscape and then about some of our programs that correspond to that landscape that are relevant to the topic. Last July, UNOCT, the Office of Counterterrorism, held a week-long virtual conference to help member states and civil society take stock of the effect the pandemic would have on terrorism and efforts to combat it. It was apparent then and even clearer now that terrorist groups see the uncertainty created by the pandemic as a tactical advantage and a window of opportunity to advance their agendas. They are exploiting the significant disruption and economic hardships caused by COVID-19 to spread fear, hate, and division, as well as radicalize and recruit new followers. They have ramped up their propaganda efforts in cyberspace to target captive online audiences, especially youth, confined at home, many of them out of school or out of jobs. With their ability to conduct attacks overseas stymied by pandemic-related travel restrictions, terrorists have continued to inspire others to attack at home. But they have also sought to take advantage of government forces redeployed to address or weaken by the effects of the pandemic. The result has been an upsurge in terrorist attacks in the Sahel and parts of sub-Saharan Africa, with ISIL and Al-Qaeda regional affiliates there gaining autonomy, strength, and ground. The pandemic has also impeded efforts to repatriate tens of thousands of mostly women and children left over from ISIL's territorial last stand and who now remain stranded in camps in northeast Syria, their countries of nationality unable or unwilling to take them back. Meanwhile, vital services for victims of terrorism, such as criminal justice processes and psychosocial support, have been badly affected, along with their access to their invaluable peer support networks and ability to commemorate. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks not just the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, but also the 15th anniversary of the UN's four-pillar global strategy to counter terrorism. The strategy's first pillar is the effort to address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. Activities under Pillar 1 constitute measures associated with preventing and countering violent extremism conducive to terrorism. PCBE, as it is known, occurs close to the nexus between development and security, which also relates to this conference's subject. So with that in mind, let me highlight three important focus areas of UNOCT PCBE efforts. First, upholding the rights and needs of victims of terrorism, including victims of sexual and gender-based violence and children affected by terrorism, is central to accountability, healing, and prevention in order for societies to break free from terrorist violence. Victims of terrorism often require longer-term multidimensional support to help them recover and cope with trauma, which for many victims has been re-triggered by the pandemic experience. UNOCT's Global Victims of Terrorism Support Program is providing technical assistance and capacity building to meet the needs and uphold the rights of victims of terrorism by requesting member states. UNOCT has also moved many of its activities online and connected victims and victims associations together to build their resilience in the face of the global crisis. This year will be a landmark year to strengthen our support for victims of terrorism and their families, particularly with the holding of the first UN Global Victims Congress and the annual International Day of Remembrance of and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism in August. Second, repatriating, prosecuting, rehabilitating, and reintegrating foreign terrorist fighters and affiliated individuals stranded in the conflict zone, especially women and children. More than 2 years after the territorial defeat of ISIL, some 27,000 foreign children are still in harm's way in camps in northeast Syria, including about 8,000 children from some 60 countries other than Iraq. 90% of them are under 12 years of age. In response, we have developed a global framework of 15 UN entities to support requesting member states with regard to individuals returned from Iraq and Syria, including protection of and psychosocial support for the children among them, but also measures that help states rehabilitate and reintegrate those associated with UN-designated terrorist groups. The global framework also helps states organize to hold accountable those persons who committed grievous offenses. Third, our international hub on behavioral insights to counterterrorism, recently established in Doha, will address risk and resilience factors and develop behaviorally informed interventions that effectively prevent and counter violent extremism. This will add a crucial new dimension to our understanding of why and how people become radicalized to violence and where we can intervene most effectively to halt the radicalization process. Strengthen mental health and psychosocial support at the individual and community levels can prevent radicalization by addressing some of the cognitive vulnerabilities that violent extremists exploit. Creative use of behavioral insight methodologies can provide solutions to address these challenges. Lastly, our UN Counterterrorism Center has also developed a new global PCVE program to streamline our offers of support in partnership with UNDP and other UN entities under 9 mutually reinforcing portfolios, including education, human rights, youth, and strategic communications. This program will ensure that we mainstream gender, conflict sensitivity, monitoring, evaluation, and the do no harm principle into our PCVE work. Ladies and gentlemen, in today's isolated work and pandemic stress environment, mental health and psychosocial support are crucial for building resilient communities. UNOCT and the 43 entities that make up the UN's Global Counterterrorism Compact are fully committed to supporting member states and our civil society partners in addressing all these challenges. We look forward to continue working with all of you to pursue new projects and innovative ideas that will take us one step closer to a future without terrorism. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Gregorian. That's very, very valuable work being done by UNOCT, not just for victims and the terrorists themselves, but for any one of us who could be a victim today, tomorrow, day after. And thank you again. We're very grateful for the insights that you've given us that we normally wouldn't be getting. Thank you. So with this, we move on to IAHV, the global story. Darshak gave you a certain perspective as the president. And now I'm inviting Phyllis, who is the executive director of IAHV USA and leads IAHV's governance, strategic partnerships, and public relations. Her engagements include serving at the Secretary's Subcommittee on Women at the US State Department and the Lessons Learned Working Committee at the US Institute for Peace. She has also overseen the implementation of several of IAHV's federal grants for women empowerment programs in Iraq since 2004. Phyllis, an old friend, can you tell us about all the amazing work that IAHV has been doing globally?
Thank you very much, Ghahremani. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to every one of you. Few years ago, I was invited to attend Preventing Violent Extremism Through Civil Society Innovation during the UN General Assembly meetings, and was moved by one of the speakers, Haruna Abdullahi. He's a president of an NGO in Niger, who shared the horrendous stories of violence and suffering that Boko Haram inflicted in his village. During the break, I introduced myself and told him about our trauma relief courses. And he was quite intrigued and stopped by at our center when he was in Washington, D.C. a few days later, both to find out more about our programs and catch a glimpse of the work that we do. I led him in through a guided breath-based meditation technique, which was a first and a deep experience for him. And when he finally came out, he said, I think I came all the way to the United States just to find out about this program. We need this. How can I take it myself, and how can I bring this to my community? And he was so determined to experience the course as soon as possible that he raised funds, I think through the Global Center in New York City, and flew with 4 of his staff to Nigeria to take the course. And since then, he has been working to meet all the requirements to become a facilitator for these workshops. The world needs people like Haruna who are passionate to bring relief to their communities, and the mental health needs of the world, of people, increase globally. As a non-profit NGO founded in 1997, IAHV is registered in more than 30 countries, but along with its partner Art of Living, operates in 156 countries. We work very much within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we do this in 3 levels. At the individual level, where people are struggling with anxiety and depression. At the community level, where these individual problems of stress and aggression are spilling over into the community in the form of gangs, drugs, and gun violence, where people, mostly youth, are both victims and perpetrators. And at the global level, where radicalized individuals are wreaking unimaginable carnage and violence across borders. We work with survivors of violence and empowering especially women and girls to overcome trauma and become agents of change within their communities. We also work to counter terrorism through rehabilitation and reintegration of ex-militants into mainstream society, preventing suicide for veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, with at-risk youth in inner city schools, students, refugees, prisoners, rebuilding trust between police, former gang members and communities, and the survivors of natural and man-made disasters. Our evidence-based methodology, which sees the individual as the unit of change and focuses on placing people back to the center of peace-building policies and practices, is included in the Radicalization Awareness Network of the European Union, a collection of best practices to PVE and CT. These breath-based tools and techniques do not make people dependent on external support. They are easy to learn and to integrate into life, applicable across cultures, free from risk of stigmatization, and without requiring the involvement of psychologists and psychiatrists. As one of the graduates of our programs in Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan said, I consider breathing like a travel bag. As Syrians, today we are here, perhaps tomorrow some of us will be in Europe, maybe outside the camp. It is not a book we may lose or a PDF file we copied. Breath is always with us, and we can spread it everywhere. In our newly released impact report, independently validated numbers show that we reached about 7,400 plus fighters who laid down their arms, including Kashmiri militants, Naxalite terrorists, FARC rebels, Kosovo Liberation Army veterans, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam in Sri Lanka, Ulfa militants in Assam, and Maoists in Nepal. About 300,000 plus trauma relief beneficiaries, and these include people living in Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Kashmir, India, US, Balkans, Kyrgyzstan, Sri Lanka, Northern Caucasus, and Afghanistan. And in Iraq alone, where we have been since 2003, we reached over 50,000 people, many of whom are Iraqi widows and youth. And our programs for healing, resilience, and prevention of extremism reached 18,000 war-affected children in Lebanon and Jordan. We offered rehabilitation programs for about 700,000 prisoners and staff in 50 countries worldwide. We implemented reintegration of gang members in Panama and Los Angeles with LAPD, with community members as well. Our work continues transforming individual lives and unifying communities, and I think we realize that the solution to the greatest challenges lie in strengthening the individual who face these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. That's very, very inspiring work that's happening all over the world by your teams, our teams. And, you know, I picked up on something that you said about evidence-based research. And when we had a conversation earlier, I asked you, what is it that distinguishes the work that IAHV does? And you said, Rukmini, it's evidence-based research. So we actually have a researcher here with us, Dr. Dara Ghahremani is a research professor and neuroscientist in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA. He has been studying the effect of breathing techniques on behavior and brain functioning. He was a steering committee member of Rewiring the Brain for Peace, a project of Alliance for Peacebuilding funded by the US Institute of Peace, with the goal of proposing neuroscience-based solutions to support the field of peace building. Dr. Dara, rewiring the brain for peace sounds so fascinating. Can you explain to us how breathing techniques can help deal with stress, anxiety, and trauma?
Yes, of course, and thanks for inviting me to join this esteemed panel. So I'll just talk a little bit about how stress works in the body, and then we can talk about how breathing is a very special solution to reducing stress. So stress is something that is actually essential for our survival, and in small doses we very much need it for just to be able to continue our survival, as I said. However, when stress is constantly activated, when it's chronic, it can lead to many detrimental consequences. But just for an example, you know, when someone is stressed or highly anxious, one thing that happens is that their decision making is compromised. The more reactive parts of their brain are activated, and they're really in this state that's called fight or flight. And our bodies are designed this way in order to be able to, say, for example, quickly mobilize energy and move away from potential threats. Another part of our system that is generally referred to as our rest and digest system is the parts of our body that are kind of the maintenance crew, you might say. So this is involved in repairing sort of minor injuries in the body. It's involved in restoring our energy levels. And with chronic stress, that part of the body is suppressed. And this is why often people with chronic stress tend to have so many illnesses, or they tend to get sick more often. And so one thing about the way stress works in the brain is that the decision-making parts of the brain are often suppressed and compromised. So it's much more difficult for someone who is stressed to reason through in sort of a stepwise fashion a plan of action. And this is often what leads to a lot of conflict, because in the stress state, there's often this impulsive sensibility that comes up in which a very quick and immediate solution is sought after, but it's not necessarily the best solution. And what happens is that during a stress state, it's very difficult to actually tell yourself to calm down. It's difficult for someone else to say, hey, you are stressed, you need to calm down. It's almost like it has a mind of its own, and it's not really within our control in terms of just thinking about not being stressed. And this is where breathing comes in, because it's one of the few autonomic functions, one of the few automatic functions of the body that's also within our control. And we're still, scientifically trying to understand the connection between breathing and mental states. But we know from years of experience and many traditions that breathing has a powerful effect on the mind and reducing stress. And in these sorts of settings where there's a need for reducing stress on a massive level in regions that are affected by trauma, it's a very useful tool to be able to immediately bring a more relaxed and calm state of mind. I'll just give you a few examples from my research. I've studied schools in very stressed neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and many have characterized these neighborhoods as being similar to war zones. What we found is that by delivering a very simple, easy to learn, accessible program for learning these breathing techniques, students showed a decrease in impulsive behavior. And in other laboratory studies that we've had, we've shown that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's suppressed during stress and is important for decision-making, is enhanced. The activation in that part of the brain is enhanced during emotion regulation when people have undergone these breathing techniques. So, in terms of having a quick, empowering solution to reducing stress and trauma on a large scale, we know that such biopsychosocial programs, and the bio aspect of it is introducing these body-based techniques such as breathing. It can empower people to reduce their stress and to regain their reasoning ability in order to interact and come up with solutions that are beneficial for them and their community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dara. That was so interesting for the Art of Living and the International Association that has been working with stress in trauma situations, in conflict zones. It is very important for us to have the entire scientific community work with us and other organizations working like us in peace building and disaster and humanitarian work to create greater synergies to make the work that we are doing more sustainable and impactful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dara. So with this, we come to the end of the first panel. We move on to our next set of speakers, and this is really interesting because they bring in a certain vocabulary which is now trending in the world of development today. So there's an acronym called MHPSS. This expanded, it means mental health and psychosocial support, which in its deepest core means taking care of the hearts and minds of people impacted by conflict, humanitarian, or developmental challenges. For some of us, MHPSS in peace building and development is a no-brainer. Many organizations who work directly with people's realities on the ground just naturally integrate MHPSS into their programs for development and peace building. And yet, it took several decades for the topic to be discussed openly and with urgency at the global level. Today, we have a specific interagency committee and a global reference group on MHPSS and peace building. We also have ongoing efforts to integrate mental health more centrally in the UN peace building architecture. In our second panel today, we have key players who've worked passionately to lead this movement in different parts of the world. Through this session, we hope to be able to come together to integrate, find practical solutions to apply MHPSS in peace building development and humanitarian aid. The question to all the speakers to cover in 5 minutes is exactly the same. What is the importance of MHPSS in peace building and development? We would like to hear both your personal and professional perspectives. Second, how is your organization addressing this important aspect? At this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce my co-moderator on this panel, Dr. Katrine Hertog, who also happens to be a speaker on the panel. And usually when I beam Katrine in from wherever she is, it's usually from a conflict zone into wherever I'm conducting a capacity building workshop. I think the last time this happened was when I was in Cape Town and you were in the middle of a conflict zone in Lebanon. You remember that? Anyway, Katrine right now is in very peaceful environments in the Black Forest in Germany. Katrine, over to you now.
Yes, thank you, Ghahremani. Hello, everyone. I'm very delighted to be with you all. Some of you I've known for quite some time, and some we are just getting to know better right now. But I'm very pleased to introduce as our first speaker of this second round of our panel, Nika Saidi from UNDP New York. She's the team leader for prevention of violent extremism as part of the conflict prevention, peace building, and responsive institutions. Among a wide range of experience related to women, peace, security, governance, religion, culture, and others, Nika also leads the UNDP workstream on mental health and psychosocial support. So Nika, we know UNDP and your team play a very important role in raising awareness and integrating MHPSS in peace building and development. Can you share with us what you have done and why you and your team are so passionate to work on this issue?
Sure, thank you so much for having UNDP and me here. Appreciate it. And I think Ghahremani mentioned about that integrating MHPSS mental health psychosocial support in peace building is no-brainer. And I do agree, but always there is a passion that comes from an individual that leads the organization also leading or vice versa. I just want to share my personal story. I grew up in a war zone, and I also experienced persecution, religious persecution. So our community comes together and try to do group therapy, group counseling, understanding how to unpack and help the community to pass through what we were going through. And for me, it was always why some people get traumatized, and using that as the point that we still don't know what does that mean in many levels when we are working on peace building on community level. Is not a professionalized pathway for many of us. And then I was questioning that. And when I started working as part of the international development and UNDP, looking at how much we incorporate MHPSS in GBV, gender-based violence work, in many area of work as part of the reintegration. And then I realized actually we do not have any clear standalone guidance or help or creating infrastructure to support peer-to-peer exchange around MHPSS, and understanding that we talk about development, humanitarian, peace building, those are the ones that we use as a UN or as international development working together. For people, day-to-day life is integrated. They understand the dimension of mind, body, and soul, and how they interact, and that's a life. All of us have what we experienced during COVID. So I say that because we realized, 20–30% of our country offices are either incorporating MHPSS as part of the work they do. That's the same that the Peacebuilding Fund has done in stock taking, and they realized 30% of their project are incorporating MHPSS in one way or another way as a standalone, as one of the outputs in the project. So there is a demand from the country offices. And UNDP is one of the organizations that implements 60% of the Peacebuilding Fund. So if you consider that 60% is being implemented by UNDP, 30%, 40% of what we are doing also incorporate MHPSS, that means almost 30% of the project that is being implemented in the world on peacebuilding, somehow UNDP has a say, and they're all contribute to MHPSS being integrated. So we did a mapping. We worked and collaborated with many of you here. We supported over the last 2 years to better understand where we should go. We realized that the first point is to create a policy guidance framework, and that's why we are now recruiting consultant to help us with developing a guidance. And the second is to advocate, and the third to be mindful of risk associated with just randomly integrating or naming whatever comes on our way as integration of MHPSS in peacebuilding. So with that view, we have been working over the last 2 years, and the first start was to connect, and that's why we are here, to connect the work that many NGOs, many experts, they have been leading to the work we are doing. For example, in 6 countries that we are incorporating behavior insight as part of our programming to ensure that programs are evidence-based, incorporating on a measure, making them stick, we have learned that there's integration of behavior insight and cognitive behavior, and how together they contribute to the change in to change that we're expecting to see as part of our intervention. Then also we have learned, we keep use counter narrative. I'm leading the work on PVE, and we use counter narrative, and we realize it's actually not a right way to go ahead, because many ways we work with Moonshot and we learn from them that providing alternative narrative, it's much better than actually countering. We can't change anyone's if you counter their behavior or the ideology. That's actually by default is create reverse psychology. So there's a lot of learning needs to be done, but the learning that it belongs to everyone, and it's shared with country offices. So basically at this moment, I know my time has come to the end, and I will be happy to answer the further questions. We are working very closely with the Interagency Standing Committee on MHPSS. We collaborate with organizations that are having this knowledge and expertise to help UNDP to further develop this framing, this policy and guidance around peacebuilding. And it's important steps moving forward. We have seen an increase in demand that comes to UNDP in better respond to the needs of member states. In Mozambique, as part of what's going on, we have received so much requests, and many other countries, Syria, and all of them are somehow providing support. And just moving forward, what we know, it's bringing 2 different professions, mental health and peacebuilding, to collaborate and work closely. And that's where the bottleneck is, not only conceptually, but professionally. What does that mean on the ground, and extended coordination? So thank you.
Thank you, Nika. So you end with a difficult question, which we will discuss further, but it's very insightful also to hear from you, who is so active within the UN system, and very encouraging that so much is already done, through different UN agencies on this topic, but also very interesting how you link, or you emphasize that on a personal level, we kind of all know it is integrated, and then, the force and the inspiration behind it to make it integrate on operational levels and policy making, etc. So thank you for not just you, but the whole team in UNDP and beyond for moving this forward. We have another very powerful actor in this field, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. I'm very happy to welcome Mariette Schuurman. She's the Director Stability and Humanitarian Aid in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Previously, she acted acted as the Human Rights Ambassador of the Ministry and coordinated the Dutch membership of the UN Security Council. She served as NATO's Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security and as the Dutch Ambassador to the Republic of North Macedonia. So Mariette, welcome. We know the Netherlands has been playing an important leading role in developing expertise and mobilizing other countries and institutions to integrate MHPSS in emergency aid and peacebuilding. So why are the Netherlands and you personally so passionate about this work? And can you tell us more about it?
Thanks, Katrina, for the kind introduction. And I think after Nika's story, you know, I'm in all modesty, I'm happy to share our experience, but it's very much thanks to people and experts like Nika that we, I think, got in cooperation where we are. Maybe I think from what I wanted to share today, I think three takeaways, three core messages that I would like to say. The first is that mental health psychosocial support, MHPSS, for us really is at the heart of crisis response, peace building and sustainable development. It's the very essence of our common goal in these three disciplines to boost people's resilience. And as been said by many others before me, really the importance of mental health for people's resilience is really a no-brainer. And we know that from our own recent histories, but also our current experience. Our ability to cope and to overcome depends first and foremost on our mental strength. And the final message I would say is that what we have, as the Netherlands then have been doing, thanks to the leadership of our Minister Sigrid Kaag, is really to get the recognition at the global level of the extraordinary resilience, lived experience, and the hard work at the local level for the past decades on strengthening mental health. So to foster really a system change, a change of mindset or paradigm, if you want, towards a people-centered global system that's responsive to and in support of people's demonstrated resilience and mental strength in the most difficult circumstances. So if I elaborate on these 3 points very quickly. So why is this important? As I said, it is a no-brainer. The single most decisive factor for people's survival is their mental strength and their mental well-being. So strengthening people's resilience is the common goal of humanitarian work, of development work, of peace building work. It's the heart of the SDGs and of my day-to-day work on conflict prevention, conflict resolution, humanitarian aid, and addressing displacement. So for the Netherlands, in our humanitarian and development and prevention policies, we recognize that people's resilience and their ability to act, to interact, to cope, to recover, to develop depends not only on their physical, but first and foremost on their mental health. So investing in mental health is core business. It's a direct investment in people's resilience, and it increases the effectiveness of other interventions to that end that are focused on resilience and prevention. As I said, it's a no-brainer. We found really that this is people all over the world can relate to, from our recent history all over the world, often violent history, but also now with the pandemic from our current experience. So COVID has not only revealed fundamental pre-existing faults in our system, inequalities and divides, but it also has demonstrated that we have a lot in common. And it has also shown to everyone around the globe how unsettling and deeply disrupting a crisis can be for one's basic certainties in life, and the stress caused by being out of control and out of touch. So it's also led to an increased understanding and awareness that mental health and psychosocial support in crisis is critical and at the core. So what we have done is really to try to get that local understanding recognized at the global level. We did that in the Amsterdam conference, in getting a global recognition of the importance of mental health and psychosocial support as a basic need in responding to crisis. And then we took it one step further in order to get that anchored in the international system as part and parcel of peace building. And what we did is we worked with experts like Nika and Friederike to come up with a set of recommendations for the Secretary General and for the UN system on how to do better in making really mental health, psychosocial support core business for all we do in terms of prevention and resilience. Obviously, a lot has to be done still in terms of tools and guidelines, as Nika explained, but we're very happy that in the latest report of the Secretary General on peace building, there's a recognition that we need mental health, psychosocial support, sensitive approaches, and recognition that we have to better integrate and further integrate what we're already doing, but we have to do that more systematic and more sustained, better integrate mental health, psychosocial support and peace building, because that is how we really foster and build on the strength that people in the most difficult circumstances in the world have demonstrated already and are demonstrating on a day-to-day basis. And we owe it to them that we support their resilience and foster their mental health and well-being.
Thank you so much, Mariette. It really speaks of a very strong drive, and you outlined very clearly the steps that are already taken, very importantly, and of course also the steps that we still can take together. And many times when I listen to representatives from the Ministry of in the Netherlands, the language is very ambitious, right? Let's make development and peace building people-centered. Yeah? Our Minister Kaag speaking openly about recognizing the soul. Yeah, so this kind of language is really very human-oriented and goes to the core of, I think, what many of us are aspiring. Rukmani, you want to introduce me?
As a co-moderator and a panelist, since you can't introduce yourself, the privilege is absolutely mine, Katrine. Dr. Katrine Hertog is a peace builder, researcher, trainer and practitioner of 20 years of experience in the academic and non-governmental sector. In her capacity as Director, Peace Building Programs for the International Association for Human Values, she has been pioneering the practice of psychosocial peace building and advocating for its integration in international peace building policy. My question to Katrina, can you tell us more about the integrated approach that IAHV has been taking and why you are so passionate about it?
Thank you. So, yes, for sure. Listening just now to the contributions of our different speakers, I was just reminded that, with this no-brainer, I also had this kind of no-brainer feeling 15 years ago. But though I was speaking about this 15 years ago, nobody was really listening. But now there is an audience and now it is clear. So it's a very different climate and I'm glad we are together. So, at the system level, it seems quite complex not to integrate MHPSS peace building and development, but like some of us were already sharing, on a deeper level, it is almost intrinsically interlinked. When we look at the aspiration of MHPSS in the broader sense, it is optimal health, which is much more than the absence of disease. And the aspiration of peace building as positive peace is much more than the absence of violence. When we go to the deeper level of the aspirations of both these fields, we feel they are already intrinsically interlinked. So IHV is working on these deeper levels of our human existence, so to speak. And so we have a model that is naturally kind of integrated, which is what I want to talk a little bit more about today, in the hope it is inspirational. So myself, I did the first IAHV program as a participant many, many years ago. And I experienced such a peace I didn't even know that existed. This was such a surprise for me. And at the moment I was studying peace studies, I was working with different peace building organizations. And I thought this is the kind of techniques and knowledge we need to bring into international peace building, because they are simple, they are effective, they can be applied across cultures. And there was not so much attention at that time for the human dimension of peace building. So since then, I've been passionate about this. So our approach on Dr. Ghahremani already explained, like many organizations, we work on mindsets, on emotions, identity, the cognitive level, etc. But what makes our approach rather unique is the fact that we have this biopsychosocial approach, which Dr. Ghahremani explained. Yeah, we actually are rewiring our brain for peace. We are changing our physiology so that we are able to act peacefully under circumstances of stress and violence, where otherwise we would be more reactive. Yeah. So I remember I've also trained hundreds or maybe 1,000 prisoners in rehabilitation programs. And the feedback that they give at the end, most of the time, like that I heard the most, is now I think before I act. And this is exactly what we are talking about. We are enabling people to use peace building strategies when we are under stress, conflict, violence, and tension. And this way, we break or prevent the cycle of violence or conflict, because we are not acting that aggression, violence out. And we preserve people's well-being. Yeah, we are also not acting towards ourselves or towards others in a harmful way. So this is a very crucial and quite unique component where my colleagues, Feliz and Darshak, have already explained how it applies in so many sectors and with so many different populations around the world, in prevention, intervention, rehabilitation, whether it is affected communities, perpetrators of violence, whether it's the military, students, etc. Because we are all human and we are wired the same, we are breathing similarly. Yeah? So it's a very effective instrument. So on the personal level, IAHV has this very comprehensive approach, going from the physiological level to deeply existential levels, yeah, where we really gain trust and meaning again, and feeling of connectedness with the existence as such. At the same time, on our project level, we also have this integrated approach. Like, for example, our youth leadership program that we implemented in Lebanon and Jordan for vulnerable youth. We start from healing and resilience, and then when the youth are able to release stress and trauma, then we can empower them with skills, yeah, that they require. And in this way, they can start, when they are healed and strengthened from inside, then the next step is, you know, taking social responsibility and actually making an impact for development and for peace building in their communities and schools. So this is the model that we use and how we actually work from personal transformation into peace building impact. And we believe we need this in all sectors of peace building. Yeah, whether it's for DDR, we need trust. For development and vocational training, we need youth to be able to focus, etc. So we have a lot of evidence on that it works. Yeah? More than 70 peer-reviewed articles talking about how these techniques reduce depression, PTSD, and anxiety. And also a few, but not enough, studies on the social impact. No? For example, reduction in recidivism in US prisons, or reduction in impulsive police shootings in Brazil, etc. So I think my time is over. What I want to say as a last point is that we should see our human existence as a scale of potential, right? So we do not just address the consequences of conflict and violence, but we also help people to really fulfill their full potential and really thrive. So MHPSS, and we are really moving and working with communities and individuals along that scale, wherever they are, till we all become peaceful and very active, empowered and skillful peace builders in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrine. I've seen the work that you do. I've seen your work with the people. I know your heart is with them completely. And with the mind of a scientist, you bring a wonderful synergy into this area of peace building, for which we're extremely grateful. Now, from Katrine, I move to another panelist who's got extensive experience also from the ground. Dr. Heidi Ryder is the MHPSS Program Manager for the International Organization for Migration in South Sudan and chairs the MHPSS Technical Working Committee Group. She's a clinical psychologist with 15 years of experience in conducting research and developing and implementing mental health and psychosocial support programs in Germany, in Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, and South Sudan. Heidi, you've worked consistently on MHPSS development and humanitarian aid for many years. Can you tell us why your work is so important to you? What has the International Organization for Migration done in this area? You're muted, Heidi, you're muted.
Let me unmute myself. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction and for inviting me to this important panel, interesting discussion. Why am I passionate by the topic? I think this is something that has accompanied my professional development since the beginning when I was working in Rwanda with genocide survivors, trying to figure out how can people overcome those kind of experiences, atrocities they've gone through, and rebuild their lives at community level. Also specifically in a context where transitional justice was very highly discussed with the gacaca systems at that time being in place. So we were trying to figure out what do people need, how can they overcome those experiences and deal with daily stresses after the genocide. And I think those questions, finding out what helps people, what are the right approaches to use, what is context appropriate, and how does it fit into the broader peace building discussion, has kept me, has stayed with me since, and drives me, because there's still, as you said, a lot of questions that we need to answer and we want to find out about. For me, the community-based MHPSS approach, and this is also something I want to focus in my short comment, is something that is at heart of what I believe in and also what I want to present on behalf of IOM, the International Organization for Migration, because this is how we work. I have prepared a few slides. If you could share, that would be great. Yeah, next slide, please. Next slide. I think we've started already, and a lot of things that I want to touch on have already been mentioned also by other speakers in terms of why is it important to integrate MHPSS into peace building, development, and humanitarian work. I think what I want to highlight or focus again on is that we talk about the different levels of communities and societies affected by conflict and displacement. So what we try to do with the integration of MHPSS into the broader peace building activities is to enable not only individuals but also communities and societies to contribute to peace and development. And as Katrine and others have mentioned already, it comes with a peace of mind. So at the heart of this work is the human being. So we try to strengthen the human being to overcome the experience of past trauma and current daily stresses, because very often people, especially living in IDP camps, in displacement sites, are confronted with a lot of daily stress. Actually, not only what happened in the past, but to deal with daily stresses is something we want to look at and to improve the daily functioning, to actually be able also to contribute to peace in the community. Other aspects are at the core of our work is like looking at the social fabric, how to restore the social fabric, recreate trust and ownership of communities, because we believe at the end it's a lot of the solutions are already at the level of the community. They are there. They just need to be supported from outside or from inside to develop themselves into something that is helpful and will move forward the community at a certain stage. It also includes looking into developing rituals and symbols that acknowledge suffering and acknowledge it in a dignified way, and to address also root causes of violence and break cycles of violence. We heard about the activities in the area of prevention of violent extremism. This is part of, and is also linked to work with the community. And last but not least, working with policymakers and governments to ensure that mental health is included in the development and recovery of institutions, because very often we work in situations where the mental health care system is destroyed, and it's not necessarily a priority of societies and countries to reestablish those services available to the community. Next slide, please. I want to briefly highlight what IOM, the International Organization Migration, is doing in that context, and actually again focusing on the community-based work. One, there are 3 or 4 pillars that we focus on, and so far MHPSS activities have been developed in more than 72 countries. The first main one is a community stabilization, so working on strengthening social cohesion that we do in Lebanon, Nigeria, and Libya and Iraq, where we have worked with recreation and counseling centers and community-based supports, including creative and arts-based activities, non-formal learning, and others that help actually to recreate and establish the mental well-being of individuals and communities. In the same way, IOM works on integration of MHPSS in conflict transformation and also in livelihood, where we try to integrate it and work closely with the different partners offering transition and recovery activities. Next slide, please. And the second the second element that are relevant in the work on transition and recovery are linked to DDR activities, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, that IOM has been working on for quite some time in terms of offering MHPSS to former combatants, reintegration of combatants, but also to affiliated family members. And linked to it is the prevention of violent extremism, currently mainly in Morocco and in the Western Balkans. And last but not least, the reparation programs that IOM is supporting currently in Sri Lanka by guiding governments in terms of helping the reparation counselors, offering those services to people receiving reparations. The last slide, and I come to an end. So there are different elements that are included already in the integration, but I think there's more that needs to be done in terms of interagency coordination to make sure that MHPSS and peace builders speak the same language, and that we also identify evidence and research that shows that there's an added value to the fact that we integrate MHPSS into peacebuilding. I think there's still much more that needs to be done in terms of advocacy as well, to ensure that we have longer term projects that also allow us to provide enough flexibility and adapt our programming to specific contexts and place. Thanks, Ghahremani. Handing over to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I just received a message from the tech team that we have to close in 10 minutes. And we still have 2 speakers left. So I'm going to have to rush our 2 speakers, because the next session will just come onto this channel and it's on meditation. So I invite you all to stay and meditate, but we will just have to rush to the next couple of minutes. And Katrine, we are going to Friederike now.
Yes, so it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Friederike. We got to know each other quite some years ago in South Africa. Friederike is the senior project leader in the Peacebuilding Interventions Program at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa. She leads IGR's research on the interconnectedness between mental health and psychosocial support and peace building, working with community leaders and policymakers to develop and advocate for an integrated approach to the fields. In this capacity, she was instrumental in establishing the global reference group on MHPSS and peace building, of which some of us here are a member as well. So Friederike, you have led several case studies on the ground, co-creating integration with actors of the different fields and exploring challenges and solutions to the integration of MHPSS and peace building on different levels. Can you share with us a little bit how the work is going and how it is for you to do this kind of work?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Katrine, and thanks also very much to Ghahremani and everybody who's spoken so far. It's really lovely to be part of this group. It feels like around with kindred spirits who are all sort of singing as part of a choir towards something that we all believe in very firmly, both professionally and personally. And I think that's really important. So for me, I've been working on this for 5 or 6 years, and I think it's really hugely exciting how this Nexus work is really gaining massive momentum at varying levels, internationally, locally. Africa's lagging behind a little bit, and as a South African, I think I'm allowed to say that. We'll get there eventually, and certainly IGR is doing what it can in order to sort of push that agenda. Just to say that everything that Katrine and Heide in particular, but Nika and Mariette as well have added is very much part of what we're working on. And I love that there's already sort of a sense that there is a team of people working and who can support one another in this work. For me, this work is very, very personal, Katrine, and I think this is important. It sort of drives my motivation for it. My grandparents fled East Germany during the Sovietization in the early 1950s. And for as long as I can remember my grandmother talking to me about their life, she spoke about the crippling homesickness and depression that my grandfather suffered as a result of fleeing his beloved homeland and the long-term emotional and economic impact this has had on their family. And it goes without saying that had a trickle-down effect on me and my mental well-being, as well as my family around me today. And then, of course, in South Africa, and I'm sure many of you have visited South Africa, South African citizens witness the legacy of our violent past on a daily basis. And so while I think we are also a resilient people, like all people, the pain of unresolved and unacknowledged suffering that dates back to slavery, colonialism, and apartheid sits very deeply in our bones. And this plays out in our country every single day as we witness all forms of violence, sexual violence, and gender-based violence in particular around the world. For me, it's quite simple. There cannot be peace without peace of mind. Conflict destroys not only infrastructure, it disrupts social fabric and destroys the fragile links that govern the functioning of a healthy society. And so for me, MHPSS and peacebuilding practitioners must work together to rebuild societies. And while it is a no-brainer, we have a lot of work to do to get there. Certainly advocacy efforts at an international level by individuals like Sigrid Koch and others are really instrumental, but much more work needs to happen. So we know that post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression in conflict-affected societies more than double the mean prevalence that is estimated by the Global Burden of Disease study. And we also know that wounded individuals and families who've not processed their responses to trauma are less likely to be able to resist the political, economic, cultural, and social pressures, which can in turn result in further cycles of violence. And here I'm really pleased that Dr. Ghahremani made that very valuable contribution about the effect of stress on individuals. But we have a lot of work to do, I think, in making sure that that is widely understood knowledge. This all underscores the importance of launching holistic and integrated reconciliation and healing processes that target all sectors of society in a post-conflict country. Without addressing both MHPSS and peace-building needs of conflict-affected individuals and communities in an integrated way, neither field is likely to stem the scourge of direct and indirect violence. So our premise in the sense is that in order for both MHPSS and peacebuilding fields to achieve their respective outcomes, they need to work together. Now, as I've said, this is much easier said than done. IJR's research and outreach shows that the two disciplines are still working in isolation of one another, that there are stereotypes and misconceptions that are really standing in the way of a more collaborative approach. So at IJR, a relatively small organization based in Cape Town, South Africa, we have been working with the premise that if we are going to create an integrated approach, that has to fundamentally be developed by the people who are going to be using that approach. And so we've been hosting co-creation workshops with practitioners in Kenya, in Zimbabwe, and South Africa to look at exactly how it is that such an integrated approach might look. Yeah, I have a little bit more time. So there are major challenges to this. There are massive opportunities, but major challenges as well. I think the opportunities are that there are significant overlaps in the two fields. In terms of the values, and colleagues have spoken at length and eloquently about how ultimately I think that both MHPSS and peacebuilding practitioners aim towards the similar goals and objectives. We've had lots of different descriptions, whether they're well or happy or healthy societies, strengthening social fabric, building social cohesion, reconciliation. All of this is what we ultimately aspire to. And even in the practice of how we get there, there are significant overlaps, and those can be harnessed towards developing an integrated approach. There are fairly significant challenges to this. One, which we've continued to hit, especially working in Africa, is the issue around stigma. And this is really something that is a massive obstacle and that needs to be systematically addressed if we're going to be bringing these fields together. Because at the moment, there is still a very widely held sort of stereotype of mental health as something that is practiced by white men in white suits in hospitals walking around with syringes. And that's really something that we need to do a lot of work to challenge. We also, while we say that it's a no-brainer that we need to integrate the fields, there is really quite a lot of lack of knowledge about the other field. I keep citing a participant of ours who once said, but we do collaborate. We refer to the other field. Or to MHPSS practitioners. And when we dug a little bit deeper and said, but do you know what happens once you have referred? There was sort of a blank stare. And so there's this idea that, referral in itself is collaboration, is integration, when in actual fact, of course, it isn't. And then there's an interesting development, and I'm really pleased that Haida spoke about daily stresses, which is this sort of overuse and over-reliance of the word trauma as a catch-all phrase for everything. And I'm speaking specifically on behalf of peacebuilding colleagues that I work with. I'm observing trauma being used as a term to describe everything from gross human experiences resulting from gross human rights violations, to sort of being stuck in traffic, to not being able to pay school fees. And I think that's quite problematic. And I think we, in particular as peace builders, need to work to develop a much more nuanced understanding of the available language. And certainly the notion of daily stresses here is really, really important. But I'm really pleased that there is a wide spectrum of participants on this call, because I think that's what we need. We need donors, we need policymakers at a top level, but we also need people representing, or ideally themselves speaking on behalf of community practitioners who are doing this work and who are going to have to be implementing this integrated approach that we're advocating for. Thank you.
Thank you, Friederike, for your so well-informed and lived-through experience. It is clear that you're breathing this work also, and you have lots of experience working with many like-minded people. So now, briefly, we would like to invite Charmaine Kunyeng to give some points on how we can move forward. And then, in case there is no time left for all of us to share, we may consider doing a sequence of our panel with exactly the same group so that we can brainstorm, maybe not live on YouTube, but to discuss the other questions if there's an interest. But in the meantime, definitely put your thoughts also in the chat in case that we are kicked out of our panel before we properly conclude. Charmaine, can you share with us in a few minutes some of the suggestions to move forward?
Charmaine, you have very little time left because the people from the next panel are already entering the room.
I'll make it very quick. So from a no-brainer for everyone, I hope to hear a no barrier to NGOs like us who implement MHPSS in peace building on the ground. So this is basically a wish list of to people in this panel to look at how we can create a supportive environment for NGOs like us to be able to apply and actualize all our wishes on the ground. So like many said, we need that policy framework. So even in the Philippines, MHPSS is recognized by the government, but it's not included in the National Action Plan for PCBE. So like Nika said and Mariette said, we need the guidelines, we need the policies, national policies in place. And then, like many of you said, we need the research of evidence-based techniques. A lot of NGOs here say that they have integrated MHPSS in their peace building work. But if you really look deep into it, it's just usually a 1 to 2 day art therapy that they give to trauma survivors, but not really done in, not processed with by trained professionals. So we need more quality research on what works, what package of MHPSS tools is effective in peace building. And then, like a lot of you said, there's a bottleneck, no? And this integration of two sectors, health and peace building. So we face that when we're looking for funding. The peace building funders will say, oh, we don't deal with health issues. We don't fund health issues. And then the health funders will say, oh, we don't do peace building, or mental health is the last thing we want to fund. So we would like to ask that you already earmark money for MHPSS in your major peace building programs, and to also jointly develop among stakeholders like us a minimum standards package that we can all agree on, so that we can have a effective, good standards on the principles, what are the basic program elements, monitoring and evaluation indicators, and what are the implementation and funding arrangements. So we really would recommend not standalone MHPSS programs, because it's not a vertical health project, but it should be a multi-sectoral horizontal approach that that we collaborate with. So NGOs like IAHV can be the technical service providers for existing peace building organizations, and that we just integrate our projects into your existing projects so that we can have more cost effectiveness and we can scale it up much faster. Thank you. Did I make it on time, Rukmani?
Yes, you did, Charmaine. Thank you so much. And that was so concise, so sharp, so to the point. You know, this is a conversation that we need to have over an entire conference. And I think this deserves a conference on its own. And this is something that we can all collectively think about. But in the meantime, we've got our panelists from the next session already in the waiting room. And so this is I'll have to take this opportunity to thank you all immensely for coming for this very, very important discussion. And I'd also like to thank the audience for being there and continue to stay with us. This is a conversation that we have to continue to take into platforms, into every platform that we can possibly get. How we are going to do it is something that we will be discussing. Our panelists have begun to write in their suggestions on our chat here. Join our next session. Okay, so this is time up. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. And the next session.